people who had seen my entire career journey. It was a career suicidal decision. Performance cannot be an event. It needs to be like a continuous process. Whatever problem that you're trying to solve, most of them will fall under this framework called PPP. People are messy. Their growth is non-linear. This is getting connected to a very bigger picture of creating a dent in the universe of healthcare.
The People Puzzle is brought to you by Bridgeview Search Partners, an executive search firm specializing in mid to senior level hiring. With your host, Reet Rathore from the HR practice at Bridgeview, let's solve today's People Puzzle together. Hey everybody, welcome to the People Puzzle. We're very excited to welcome today Saurabh Kale as our guest. With over 18 years of experience, he most recently served as Head of People and Culture at Talent 500, where he aligned performance management systems with business goals during critical growth phases. Saurabh has built his career through key HR roles at great companies like Grab, Practo and Zeta, primarily focusing on scaling teams and transforming workplace cultures. He was also a founding team member at Peak Performer, where he helped strengthen leadership development for rising startups, including Cred and MPL. Today, we're diving into the theme navigating performance management in fast-paced startups, an area where Saurabh has consistently delivered results in building high-performing teams. So let's get started with today's People Puzzle. Hey Saurabh, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Reet, for asking, and thanks for having me today.
Thank you so much. We're very, very thrilled to have you. So, before we dig deeper into the performance management strategies, I'm very curious to know more about, your remarkable career journey. So you've played a lot of pivotal roles in multiple startups, and of course, you've undergone tremendous sort of growth as well. So I'd love to, know what initially drew you to the field of human resources in the first place. Like, did you have sort of a defining moment in your career that shaped your passion for people management?
I think there are many defining moments throughout the career. The one that I distinctly remember prior to even beginning my career in the human resources. So before we begin, I think I want to kind of, acknowledge the fact and put a disclaimer out there that I'm an accidental HR. And today, I think, from that being an accidental HR to probably, being passionate about people, it's been a journey and it's kind of grown on me. So back in college, when I was doing my graduation, I had picked up computer sciences as my subject. And typically, college is full of distractions, the ups and downs. People tend to have heartbreaks to probably going through life challenges. And I today jokingly call myself as I think I was an agony aunt back in the college, wherein I played the role of understanding people, their problems, giving or providing solutions to them. And I think that was my first realization that, when it comes to people, I'm good at it. So now when I finished with my graduation, I was very clear I don't want to pursue computer sciences for sure. But then, I wanted to still kind of be in the space of people or anything related to people. So 2-3 things did come close to it. One was marketing and second was human resources. And I did consult a lot of people and they kind of, gave me the best piece of advice back then that I think you would be great as a human resources professional, I would say. And that's where I think my journey into the human resources started. Of course, beyond that, then I went for my master's in human resources and, then the rest is history, as they say. The second inflection point that happened at this point in time was, I think, when I was in my 9 years of completion. And, I had by then worked with the services organizations. I had kind of worked primarily also with heavy product-based companies by then. I think it was somewhere around ninth year or so. And in my mind, I was also kind of getting a feeling that I'm getting complacent, probably, I'll complete a decade in just a few more months. And then what next for me? What does the next decade look like? And so on. Which is where I think I was with a, very renowned organization and probably my well-wishers and, people who have had seen my entire career journey so far thought it was a career suicidal decision that I made. Because I moved from a very well-known organization into the startup. And, I think the last 10 years, and incidentally, I complete my 10 years in the startup industry this month. And I kind of realized that, I think that was the best decision so far because from being someone, who had always spent time with, enterprises, big organizations, and so on, to completely kind of, jumping into this unknown territory. And back then, probably when people thought of startups in 2015, they hardly knew Flipkarts of the world, and that's it, right? And there were not many organizations. So I took the leap of faith, joined an organization, Practo, and I think, since then, it's kind of accelerated my journey and also, increased my belief, I would say, in the space that I've chosen as my career, right? Which is people or people related. So I think, yeah, from that point of view, when I look back, I think these were a few deciding factors in my career wherein I chose to kind of, follow my heart of my interest with people. And I think made a career out of it now. So yeah, that's
That's
what it
actually
is.
a very, I think, roller coaster journey, I think one can say. I mean, from, getting to solve people's problems in college to where you are today. That's a very unexpected way to also decide that you want to pursue HR. And I completely resonate with what you said about the startups as well. I think I have also been working only in startups. And once you come on this side, I mean, initially, yeah, it can be a little risky, but then you can't really go back. So speaking of, I'd say evolution in your career, you just mentioned that you've worked in a variety of organizations. So coming to our theme today, how have you seen performance management evolve over time, like specifically in a startup environment, since you've been in startups since 2015? So how have you seen performance management evolve in the last 10 years?
So when I kind of started my career, I was a very strong believer back then about performance reviews being very formal, very rigid, once in a year opportunity to present all the performance, productivity, or anything that you have done in the last 1 year. All right, and I think over a period of time, once again, having worked in hyper growth organizations, I have realized that performance cannot be an event. It needs to be like a continuous process. So I think just in a matter of 5 or 10 years, I have realized that it's important at this point in time to ensure that performance reviews are continuous in nature. They are, timely rewarded, to the employees. And at the same point in time, the feedback is kind of incremental, for that employee and the organization as well. The process in which today the goals are also being set have also changed over a period of time, right? So I think back in the days, there was a vision, mission, and then it would translate into the organization kind of asking the departments to chase certain goals and so on and so forth. Over a period of time, now I've realized that I think, organizations also need to change their pace at which they are kind of implementing the performance reviews. So we have recently seen the OKRs becoming popular. Then, there are departmental goals which are tied to the organizational goals and so on and so forth. So again, uh, a variety of ways in which, and I would like to kind of, take a break here to say that there are organizational performance reviews or, organizational performance as one section. And the second part is the people performance reviews as well, right? So I think, there is it's not something to be looked upon in silos. They tie to each other. So whatever the organization is chasing, if the people performance is also kind of aligned to it, I think, the both the organization and people benefit in this whole process.
Exactly. I mean, that's the goal, right? Ultimately, to align our people and our organization. That's what all companies want. And yeah, it's been a very interesting evolution, I'd say, from, annual reviews to continuous sort of feedback. But I'd love to know what you think about, how is it different from, like, if a company has, for example, a very well implemented performance management system versus a company that has a poorly implemented performance management system. So, how do you think that would impact the overall success of the company as well?
So once again, I'll kind of, talk from both the organizational performance review and the people performance review. Um,
Yeah.
what does a good performance looks like? Yeah. I think when it's successfully implemented, I think the organization and both people thrive in that environment. So you have the people, you have the processes, you have the tools, and then the entire engine runs really well to ensure that the organization and the set of people both are successful and they eventually reach the ultimate goal. On the other side, the contrast is equally true, right? A very poorly executed performance review where people are just existing at the same point in time. The organization is kind of, in a mundane, process of just ensuring that the threshold is being met. So, in short, the way I would see a poorly implemented performance review would be that, the organization and the people are surviving in that, right? More than thriving. So I think the difference between a successfully implemented performance review and a poorly implemented is just that in successfully implemented, people are organization both are thriving, and in poorly executed, I think it's just about surviving.
Yeah, exactly. And I think performance management is very central to a company's success in general. And what you said about thriving and surviving also makes a lot of sense to me as well. So yeah, I think going back to your career trajectory and your career journey, I'd love to talk about, specifically the kind of different projects and different consignments that you've taken throughout your journey. So you mentioned, of course, you've scaled a lot of organizations by 10x, right? Practo, for example, I think when you joined them, it was about 250 to 60 employees. And within, like, I think 3 years, they scaled up to 10x, up to 3,000 employees. So would love to sort of elaborate, on the unique challenges that you faced in tracking individual performance during this rapid growth phase, right? Because at every point in time, because there's so many employees getting added to the system, you would also have to keep tweaking, all your systems and how you look at reviews and management in general. So, what were some of the challenges you faced, and how did you sort of overcome these challenges? If you could share a real life example, I think that would be very helpful for our listeners.
Absolutely. So I think in multiple places, I think we've faced multiple challenges primarily. But in my opinion, whatever problem that you're trying to solve, most of them will fall under this framework called PPT. Uh, First P is people, second P is processes, the third T is tools. So if you kind of categorize whichever problem statement that you're trying to solve, whether it's for scale, whether people are pivoting, the organization is undergoing change, or whatsoever it is, if you address it through this framework, what do we need to do about people? What do we kind of need to do about the processes? And which tools will help us kind of reach there? I think the entire process becomes pretty simple. So yeah, I mean, whether it's Practo, Grab, Zeta, or even in Talent 500 recently, I have been able to deploy this entire framework and able to kind of solve many problems per se. The way I look at it, again, I'll kind of dive a little deeper. Is let's assume we are solving for the problem of scale. Then your people alignment is extremely important. So once again, it kind of ties it back to the performance reviews. How are you kind of evaluating? What's about your monthly check-ins or reviews or quarterly business reviews, your OKRs, and so on and so forth. So there is a people alignment through these kind of things. There are processes. Now, processes need to be well refined or defined. When you're scaling, most of the things are, like breaking at a neck breaking speed, and you're moving forward with that, right? So if your processes are well defined or refined, and I have an approach here which I call it as two-touch formula once again. So just the way you have a PPT, I also have a two-touch process. So any policy, or let's say any process, anything beyond two touch points, in a fast growing environment or in a hyper growth organization, probably is going to be a fail. All right. So it has to be up to two or less than two. Right. So let's say, for example, I have a very simple way to explain this. If your policy document is more than 2 pages, hardly it's going to be read. If your process requires more than two jumps, for example, let's say your reimbursements, all right, and for that reimbursements, you have to kind of take an internal approval, then go ahead and upload it, then do some yada yada yada, right? Anything beyond 2 steps, let's say, from a process point of view, people are not likely to kind of take it to finality. So once again, it's a kind of a failure. All right. So processes, this is where I say processes needs to be well defined. At the same point in time, you can kind of, simplify it, make sure, things are easy. For example, one thing that we implemented in Talent 500 was, anything around, I would say, leave application on the system. All right. So we had a process that, you had your earned leaves, casual leaves, sick leaves, and so on and so forth. So there were categorization of the leaves. And we had only one ask, to all the employees, that you can go ahead and have a discussion with your people manager to let them know about your leave plan. And if it is verbally kind of approved, all right, go ahead and put it in the system. Now, if you put it in the system and within 48 hours, if it is not approved on the system, it will be automatically approved. All right. This completely eased the whole administrative process of, employee raising a request, manager kind of approving of it. And, at the same point in time, the system sending the reminders and so on and so forth. So from a process point of view, it was very simple. You go ahead, you would have a discussion, come back, put it in the system. If there is no response from the manager, automatically within 48 hours, the leave is approved. All right. Now, finally, the tool, and which is where I think the scale comes handy, your whatever that you're kind of designing from, solving a problem of scale, let's say, all right, I think needs to, will be better off or will be kind of, will be achieved faster if there is a technology to assist it. From that point of view, I think, you need to definitely have your HRIS is in place. You can probably even leverage it, communication tools like your Slack, and so on and so forth. I mean, anything which helps you to penetrate or reach the larger audience, I think, the tools need to be selected accordingly. Now, some of the things that we also did as a part of the scale, when you are in a 0 to 1 phase, you typically need a very primary tool, for helping you out. So back in the day when probably we needed to kind of ensure that celebrations, the birthdays, the work anniversaries are kind of, done automatically so that, the manager and the employee feels great about it. We created a bot in Talent 500, which would automatically put it up in the general channel where people would be kind of, basically there's a celebration, there's a, a small fun about having a GIF in that and, a message in that. So now, automatic reminders, the employee feels good. It would go out the first thing in the morning. All right. And, like that, work anniversaries were celebrated, the birthdays were celebrated and so on and so forth. Now, the next level, this is when you're probably starting out. Let's say if you're now scaling to, a 1 to 10x phase of your startup or of any hypergrowth organization. I think now you need more than that, right? Meaning your bot will only suffice probably the celebration part of it. But how about now the next level is wherein a small message goes to, let's say it's a work anniversary, and a small message goes to all the team members by default along with the manager to put in a small text. All right. And it consolidates everything and automatically then maybe let's say it creates a longer message for the employee and sends it out. All right. Now that's the need of the next phase. Now, if you're scaling into 10 to 100, then the needs are going to be different. So the way I look at the tool at this point in time is it needs to upgrade. So there is no standard tool to kind of help you achieve a particular thing. So based on the phase of the organization, based on what you're trying to kind of create, whether it's an employee experience or whether it is a tool to ensure that your performance management is kind of completed on time across, let's say, 300 odd people, then the tools that you require are different. All right. So once again, kind of quickly summarizing, I think, the process that I kind of look at whenever I'm solving any problem, whether it is about scale, pivoting, or, addressing or taking care of multicultural employees at work. I think, the way to look at it is to kind of bucketize these problems into people, process, or technology. You're likely to find an answer in at least one of them. And then accordingly, you go ahead and, address the challenge.
Wow, very, very well said. I think the PPT approach does resonate with me. Everything you said about the people, process, and the tools makes a lot of sense. Especially, I think the tools and the process part of things where you mentioned how, for leave applications, like within 48 hours, it's going to get approved. And you're also going one step ahead to actually make people feel special on their work anniversaries and birthdays, which also builds, trust to a great extent, right? With companies that, like, yeah, employees will feel that the company does care about me. They do trust me, to approve my leave within 48 hours and to actually appreciate, acknowledge the fact that it's my work anniversary. So yeah, one question I did have about, something that you mentioned, which was monthly check-ins and quarterly reviews, right? How you talked about aligning people and processes. So, I mean, in practice, yeah, definitely it's a great exercise to do. But how do you sort of ensure that these don't just become, box ticking exercises, and there's actually something that is done about the feedback that you receive, or is done about what the employees are feeling?
So I think, I personally very strongly feel that these monthly check-ins, or let's say your monthly reviews, or let's say quarterly reviews for that matter, have a great importance in a sense to kind of create engagement within the organization.
Yeah.
Maybe at an individual level, and imagine it to be like a three concentric circles is how I would say. There is an individual, then there is a team, and then there is an organization. All right. Now, in a concentric way, if you become selfish and you say at an individual level, what does it matter to me? All right. It matters to me when my manager feels or appreciates my work or gives me a feedback directly related to my work. Right. That's a selfish way to look at it. Why do I come to work? Why do I want to kind of, work with this organization? Is the way I feel engaged with my team or with my manager. So, in all honesty, I think there is a lot of times dissonance between the individual and the organizational goals, right? So, I think that is where the check-ins play a very important role, or reviews play a very important role. So let's talk about the check-ins. Now, check-ins seems very casual, but it can also be a simple conversation where the manager wants to know how are you doing, how are you kind of, are you on track with your goals? Are there any obstacles on the way? So, the person can kind of timely get support from the manager or the team and so on and so forth, right? The monthly business reviews or quarterly business reviews, typically, if the team is invited, you get a very good, high level picture at this point in time, because there are other teams also doing the presentations along with your team, right? So I think, it's a brilliant opportunity to understand the bigger vision, of all the teams putting in together, or where the organization is heading as well. So bottom line, I feel is, though monthly check-ins, quarterly reviews, and so on and so forth are a great tool. But I think what does it kind of, help us achieve is the engagement. And this engagement, as it looks like a wonderful word, I think has a direct correlation to attrition, right? If people are engaged, there is going to be low attrition. And, which automatically means that the organization is stable. People are in here for a longer run. You don't have to kind of waste your time in training the newbies. At the same point in time, you can accelerate the sprint of your product. So I think just merely by doing these things, it may look like an activity. And, if it is done right, I don't think so. It looks like a checkbox activity. But if people understand, and especially I think people managers play a very important role in ensuring that these things are done as a rigor. So yeah, I personally feel it shouldn't become ideally a way of checkbox activity, but some things are required a lot of times to ensure that the bigger goal of attrition or retention, a sense of belonging, or why do I want to kind of do it? And I want to leave you with this thought, again, going back to Practo. I think, a lot of my startup foundations were laid at Practo. So I think one of the things we used to always talk about is leaving or creating a dent in the universe of healthcare. I think that's a very powerful statement that it used to be a constant reminder within the leadership team, within the people managers, and so on and so forth, that why did you join, or why did you kind of, why is it that you're doing what you're doing? And, people would typically kind of, take the pride in that statement to say, I'm creating a dent in the universe of healthcare. And I think that was a very powerful way to kind of see that if I'm having a conversation with my manager about what did I do in the last 1 month, I think I know that this is getting connected to a very bigger picture of creating a dent in the universe of healthcare.
Yeah. The vision, I think, has to be, that's exactly how any company's vision should be, like, to see the bigger picture over there. And, going back to my question as well, of course, these check-ins are very important and they are directly related to engagement. But I feel like, of course, as you rightly said, the way in which you do these check-ins and these meetings is also what I think matters the most over here. Um, so yeah, I think overall in your career, you've kind of worked with a lot of different sort of setups, even if we talk about startups, right? So we spoke about the scale that you've handled with Practo, but also at Zeta, I think you witnessed a complete pivot. I think initially they started with an employee wellness sort of a product, and then later on pivoted to neo banking. So that is, I think, first of all, a very interesting stint for you as a people manager also to take up. Very interesting, very challenging. But I'm very curious to know how you sort of helped employees develop, trust in the new direction, specifically when they were entering a product area that they had never worked in before. Of course, the management also must have been hired, keeping in mind the initial product, right? So, how, were you able to develop that kind of trust within the employees when the pivot happened?
So first and foremost, I think a quick disclaimer here. I think it's a team effort and not just,
Definitely.
my effort as well. And second, at this point in time, I think, the decision to move into new banking space within Zeta was already kind of made. But I think when the movement had started is when exactly I was with Zeta. Now, one of the few things that we did, and this ties back to certain frameworks once again. So if you look at, say, Great Place to Work and so on and so forth, other models of creating a sense of trust in leadership, or let's say pride in the work that you do, there are certain, I would say, tried and tested formulae that we can definitely kind of look at it, right? One of the formulae that I very strongly believe in is the communication cascade. And again, the what and the how is important. What is that you speak and how is it that you deliver, right? So I'll kind of, talk about once again through live examples so that probably it's best to understand. So when the decision was being made, I think, the nth member in your organization needs to understand why. And, Simon Sinek says it very beautifully in his book, start with the why. And, we can probably do newsletters, a lot of times. And that's also something that we tried at Practo. The first thing when we grew to a very large extent, we were in multiple geographies back then. And we kind of tried creating a newsletter, but, again, that was a limitation. We realized that people read or not read, depending on busyness in their schedule and so on and so forth. But then eventually at Practo, we also ended up doing something called as Do Great Chai. All right. You can probably have an association to Chai Pe Charcha, very similar to that. We had a Do Great Chai. Do Great was, hashtag Do Great was one of the, I would say, quite a lot of motivation for all of us internally. All right. Now, basis that learning that I had at Practo, is something that I brought back to Zeta is, okay, if face-to-face tends to work, then we need to kind of focus a lot more on all hands, where the entire organization comes in. And once again, as I talk through this, I want you to go back to the previous one where, you need to look at the individual, the team, and the organization concentric circles, right?
Yeah.
So let's say when you're doing the communication cascade, it's very important that you start with all hands. The name says it all, which is the entire org. That why we are doing, what we are doing, why are we pivoting, what is the need, and, how do we change the ways of working. And it's not a one-time event. So you'll probably have to do this multiple times every month and so on, right? So from that point of view, all hands is where everyone comes together. Then I prefer to call it as town halls. Now, town halls are small, it's meant for a town. So, you tend to typically go team by team, which are larger teams. So let's say we kind of focus on engineering team, the product team, and, marketing team. Now, the context here changes, right? What happens at an org level and what happens at a town level could be very different. So now you're kind of contextualizing it, that, okay, how does this change the ways in which engineering builds the product? How does the marketing positions the product? All right. So the town halls play a very important role in that way. Then we kind of further cascade down to a managerial level, right? Then you go by smaller teams even further, wherein you're kind of, explaining that how does this impact your day-to-day work, all right? And probably the last one that I call it is, people connects, which is one-on-one. all right, wherein in case the individual still feels, unsafe, not sure, or, what will be my future. So, maybe and both the manager and the HR can play a very beautiful role in kind of addressing individual needs as well. So from the change management, structure point of view, I think if you just go, bottom or top to bottom, I think it plays a very beautiful role in building that trust in leadership and to a very large extent, the pride in the work as well. All right. Again, I think a few companies, heavily invest in spending time on communication. Some companies probably don't feel the need and they, don't do a great job on that. And I think that is where we have seen that the employee feels unsure of their time with the organization in the future.
Yeah, I get it. I think this communication cascade approach is the only right way probably to go about it. And I'm very happy that, that's the method that you guys adopted. Out of, the four parts that you mentioned, starting with all hands to town halls to the breakup with the managers in the team, as well as the one-on-ones, which one do you think was, the most effective, according to you, in order to build confidence among employees? Number one. And I'd also like to know, how did in general employees respond to these programs or respond to these initiatives, and was it a success, the transition period, according to you?
So I think I'll go back to Zeta again. I think something that we
Yeah.
experimented back in the day was a program called as Monday Muse. It sounds like news and it's a Monday Muse. So what we ended up doing was, every Monday we would publish probably anything between 15 minutes to 45 minutes of a video of our co-founders. And I think it played a very beautiful role because, for the paucity of time and, people traveling and so on and so forth, a lot of things were happening. In that entire chaos and motion, we were able to kind of, generate more like a TED Talk equivalent, let's say, or a monologue series. I think that played a very beautiful role in ensuring that top-down approach worked wonders. So, we used to call it Monday Muse back then. Second thing that we also tried doing, which I think I like to kind of, coin these beautiful words back then. I'm a big believer in employer branding. So we used to call it as reboot. All right. And
Okay.
it's more like a re-dot boot. In that, typically, it used to be more like a peer-to-peer learning. Now, when everyone is kind of pivoting, everyone is kind of learning in their own space, imagine you create a space where people are coming and sharing their knowledge. All right. So it was more about peer-to-peer ways of learning where we kind of build internal library of this knowledge through people by inviting them every Friday, and these are not external necessarily, internal folks who are talking about, okay, let's talk about the platform. Let's talk about, let's say, in something else about the product. Let's talk about, what's the market share going to look like and so on and so forth. So now you're trying to, as you're pivoting, and of course, you're talking about the why through these town halls and, all hands. I think it's also important to now in parallel build that knowledge and understanding as well, right? Which is where the reboot series kind of worked wonders for us because everyone kind of, was excited to bring something to this conversation. And I think that created a kind of a motion through this entire process, right? Yeah, I think these are two top probably, people programs or people initiatives that I recall having done. We've tried, I think I want to kind of leave the audience with this thought at this point in time that, there is no fixed textbook when it comes to people, right? I always say this that people are messy, their growth is non-linear, right? So if people are messy and their growth is non-linear, why have a playbook approach to this whole process? At best you can try experiment and all. So we had algebra back then, and we had to prove like x equals to y, right? And we used to start with a hypothesis. The hypothesis was something like adding one on both sides and then kind of showcasing, hence proved x equals to y. I think that hypothesis is something that we also need to kind of, try it out for life is what I feel. Sometimes, you have to kind of really challenge yourself as a team, see what works. Many a times it may not work. And then you kind of come back and, check your hypothesis if your assumptions were right and so on. So my only ask at this point in time is, I probably have a few successes and many failures. I think that's important as a part of this whole journey as well.
Exactly. Rightly said. And I feel, when a company is going through such a transformation, such a change, everybody everywhere is looking for sort of familiarity, right? Whatever is familiar. So, for you guys to basically do like a Monday muse, especially Mondays are days when people are usually, of course they're productive, but they're also like a little bummed because the weekends just ended, right? So, to see your founder, motivate employees on a Monday, it actually shows that you guys want your employees to feel that this company is home, which is what, at the end of the day, we're all aiming for as well. So I think that's a very interesting approach. And the peer to peer part also, I think that's something that our listeners can definitely, be helped by. So yeah, I think with Zeta, this again very interesting stint for the pivot that you actually managed. I think with Grab also, this is sort of a global sort of an experience that you had, which is different from the other stints that that you did, because it's a lot of different cultural contexts, right? So I would love to know how you see performance management practices adapting in multicultural settings, like companies that like Grab, right, which don't primarily operate out of India. So would love to know how you manage that part.
So I think my lot of learnings actually, at Grab came from many years ago while I was with Wipro and probably spent a little bit of time with McAfee and Intel as well. I think again, it's a continuous process of learning. So some things worked there, didn't work, and that's what I was able to kind of deploy at Grab as well. But a quick one, I think I realized that back in the day when you had, say, a Western manager and an Indian employee, I think, the challenges related to culture, would play a lot of importance or the way how employee felt. All right. And it took me some time, probably when I first had an American manager and, I was mostly groomed in India. My growth had mostly happened out of India. Of course, I had traveled overseas. I had been on deputation. I think it's a wonderful way to get an exposure. But I still remember, the American way of providing a feedback is very direct, right? And I had kind of probably known this, but it took me some time to understand that the cultural nuances are very different. For example, one of the cultural nuances is high context and low context, right?
Okay.
In high context, and as the name suggests, there is a lot of prelude to the actual conversation, right? So your manager spends time, asking you, how are you doing? What are what have you been up to? Do you have any challenges? There's a lot of empathy, like there's a lot of context before coming to the actual feedback. All right. And then there is low context, which is the opposite of that, which is, there is less time spent on any, I would say, rapport building conversation and more time spent in feedback and what could be done and so on and so forth. So my first exposure, back then at that point in time was primarily my manager jumping on a call and providing me a very direct feedback. And there was, less time for pleasantries and more time for probably, how you could do things better. And I remember walking out of that conversation, then to kind of feel that what was it? I'm like, I didn't feel I was even heard. And I think that's something I've realized that, there is a lot of I would say cultural nuances when say performance reviews are being discussed as well, right? The second thing that I've also realized over a period of time is the power distance. All right, that's another I would say sub niche of cultural sensitivity. So power distance is very simple. How what's the level of hierarchy? Is it short? Is it high, tall, or is it low, short kind of a thing? All right.
Yeah.
So very simply put, the lower it is, the more approachable your manager or let's say your peers are when it comes to providing the review and like feedback, right? So I think if you understand the high context, low context, power distance, like low power distance, high power distance, and so on and so forth, and integrate these kind of concepts into the way I think performance reviews are held globally and not necessarily only in Southeast Asia. I think it probably plays a very important role in the whole process of implementing reviews. I think Grab was in a very similar stage, though it's a part of Southeast, and within Southeast Asia, we had multiple countries where cultural nuances used to play a very big role. So we tried integrating the local practices into the global frameworks. That's how I would put it. The local practices where, with regards to, for example, the power distance is will play a very important role in Southeast Asia. All right. And luckily, there are not many countries, but Philippines slightly is different when it comes to high context, low context. But, most of the Southeast Asian countries, I prefer to say that they are all on high context. So, even if the manager is sitting out of Singapore and the employee is sitting out of, say, Jakarta, we used to still find the challenges because the countries are different. The ways in which people have kind of been having their growth is different and so on and so forth. But how do you uniform all of them? I think, under the one roof and under one umbrella, under one framework of, let's say, performance reviews, all right, had been a big challenge. But I think it also plays a very important role as a part of the change management on how do you educate the employees. Again, I'll go back to the PPT approach. Education of the employees is important. How do you coach the managers is important. What processes are we going to follow, right? And so on and so forth. Like, what's the rating scale? Is it one conversation? Is it two conversation as such? So on and so forth. And then the tool, again, in this entire process, a lot of times I feel that if the tool is not understood, I think, the process execution becomes a little problem. So end of the day, I don't necessarily think, whether it is to do with Grab, say a Southeast Asian company, or let's say McAfee, which is at a global level. I think the approach needs to be very, I would say, personalized based on, I think, the individuals, the culture, and where they come from.
Yeah, I think this is an unusual sort of an approach that I've heard, because most of the time what companies that I've heard do are they have certain global frameworks that are, consistent throughout whatever countries they're based in, right? And they have to be followed. But actually to sort of integrate local practices into global frameworks is something that I think would work wonders as well, because then the people from different cultures are also feeling heard, because you are obviously changing it to their context as well, right? So I think, yeah, that's a very, very interesting strategy. I think this is also an excellent sort of segue to discussing GCCs or Global Capability Centers, since you also have, worked extensively with those. So what unique challenges do you think you see in performance management practices, in GCCs, and how can organizations sort of overcome these challenges to ensure alignment and engagement across so many diverse teams and countries and cultures, right? Because GCCs are obviously very is a word of the day these days, specifically in India. There's so many being set up. So how do you do it differently over there when the main office is in another city and there's a lot of different GCCs spread across the world?
So I don't think so. There's a major difference again, the way GCCs operate and way what I just explained, could be about the cultural nuances. But I definitely believe that the model at which, in which GCCs operate is BOT, build, operate, and transfer. So typically while you're building, it operates like any other startup where the focus is on hiring, the focus is on kind of, having a quick, say, policies and processes and so on and so forth. The challenge kind of comes in the operational stage, wherein the intention is that the local company, which is kind of managing the entire GCC, should they follow the local companies, I would say framework, or should they kind of, integrate once again with the global framework? What I've seen is a lot of times, this BOT takes typically 3 years to 5 years before the transfer actually happens. And sometimes when the transfer happens, now you're dealing with two different entities, right? You have a parent company and you have a foster company culture. All right. And foster company is the company basically that managed GCC for some time, right? So it treated this way now, there will be conflict because then, you will have to do a lot more, invest time and effort and energy in reintegrating the GCC into the parent company, right? And I think that's the only challenge that I foresee. So my general recommendation at this point in time is that let the GCCs operate right from the build stage in a way, the way parent company operates, right? And I think that's the better way to integrate performance reviews, in the way the parent company does, so that tomorrow when people come on board, it's not cultural shock when the integration happens between, once again, the parent company and the foster company. Yeah. So, but yeah, more or less the processes remains the same. You are likely to face what I discussed some time ago. Maybe the manager sits out of the west or the east, and the GCC is based out in India. So I think cultural nuances, educating how it works within India or within the Southeast Asia. I think that coaching with the parent company manager, coaching the local employees, I think is going to play a very important role in the way GCCs are successful or not.
So you do feel that, to an extent, there should be some global frameworks that are uniform across all the different countries, but also some changes can happen through some cultural nuances depending on the place, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it has its own importance, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it would be unfair for somebody to sit in an ivory tower in some part of the world and decide as a center of excellence team to say this is what everyone should follow. All right. And I think many a times the companies do adopt a very similar strategy that, okay,
Yeah.
you have a tool, the tool needs to be used in a particular way, you have a process, but give the flexibility to the local HRs to kind of, go ahead and deploy it. What sometimes, is not kind of non-negotiable is the time frame. So let's say there is a start time, there is an end time, and in between, the local, I would say, HR business partners are given that kind of freedom to say you can play around on these things, but these 4 or 5 things maybe are not negotiable. So in a very similar way, I think GCCs can also operate to say that, okay, global framework for, let's say, a Western organization is 1, 2, 3, 4. We are going to say something like 2A, 2B, 3A, 3B, something like that. So, there could be further steps for GCC being based out of India or Southeast.
Okay, Saurabh, I think let's zoom out a little bit and, consider organizational sort of maturity. We've spoken about your stints, but I would love to know your views on certain things that would be uniform across all organizations, right? So, of course, I think performance management initiatives in general require executive buy-in, right? So, would love for you to tell our, listeners about how did you demonstrate, ROI effectively and obviously resource limited settings in your experience to gain support from the leadership for any initiatives that you wanted to implement with respect to performance management, or it can be anything, employee engagement related as well.
So I think let's be a little practical when it comes to ROI, all right, return on investment. I am not a big fan of ROI, so I'll kind of tweak it to say ROE, E for expectations, all right, return on expectations. So from that point of view, if you look at it, I think why do we do the reviews in the first place is extremely important to understand. We want to understand, it's like a stop gap, or let's say it's a pit stop to understand, are we aligned? At this point in time, are people performing? It's also a great opportunity because in typically startups, people burn out. The organization is going through a lot of churn, constant pivoting, goalpost keeps on changing. I've been in organizations where what we started out at the end, start of the year and the end of the year are two different things. And, I just probably have felt a lot of times that my energy and, has constantly been, in understanding what is a new goal kind of thing, which is why I think, these days, setting up smart goals is important. Having the KPIs are important. OKRs have kind of come in. Founders, or let's say the leaders are mostly important, mostly place a lot of importance on reviews, which are monthly, quarterly, and so on and so forth, to kind of course correct or even understand at this point in time, right? So once again, the intention of having reviews at this point in time, I feel, is to understand the overall alignment of the organization. Once you know your true north, is the organization at the nth level to the employee, that we spoke, is he or she working in that direction to kind of reach that, true north, I think is the whole purpose of reviews. I don't think so. Apart from the, I would say, the afterthought, which is more like, your promotions, your, I would say, increments, or let's say any other change of roles. I personally feel they are the byproducts of this entire performance management review process, right? But the bottom line, the core of it, I believe, is very strongly about understanding the alignment. And if the alignment is misaligned, then you kind of course correct, right? Now,
Yeah.
why is it important for the leaders? Because of course, you want to ensure that people grow in the organization, people stay back. There's always a cost if there is a misalignment between the personal aspirations and the organization's ways of working. Typically, it leads to attrition, and attrition is a cost, right? On the other side, I feel that retention, is extremely important because there's no cost to it, and people managers can do a fab job on that, right? So that is there. Of course, in a byproduct, when you provide the reward as a part of this performance review, say promotion or increments, I think people feel that it's a fair organization, and my uh, efforts or hard work is kind of paid off in a fair way. So I think the way to kind of look at it at this point in time is, instead of looking at it from an ROI point of view, I would say look at it from ROE. What you started out the performance reviews for, if you have achieved those goals, the goals are being met, people are aligned, feedback is extremely important. People are also investing in their development, which is say individual development plans, which is leading to the growth in the organization, and so on and so forth, right? So I think it keeps pushing the organizational bars, forward. And I think that's how we can kind of look at the whole ROI towards performance management.
Makes sense. I think that's a very sort of holistic approach as well. I think you did mention how, recent studies also suggest that organizations that focus on employee well-being see sort of a boost in individual performance and retention. That's something that you mentioned as well, that people initially like thriving and surviving, right? So I would love to know how you think, since you have so much experience, so many years of experience in startups, how can startups integrate these well-being initiatives into their people practices?
All right. This is going to be slightly different than performance reviews as such, but I think, I still feel that when you're dealing with people, things are connected, and sometimes there's no connection, but, butterfly effect happens. Something else happens here, and, the rest of the world probably feels otherwise. So I think that's exactly how well-being and performance are to be kind of looked upon. Let's say that, if you have great people practices, and a few things that come to my mind, again, going back to a model, is respect, fairness, and pride that comes from a great place to work model. All right. Respect is mutual respect. Okay. Let's say fairness is in fairness in terms of policies and, your compensation and so on and so forth. Pride is typically, I feel, is also about having a sense of belonging to a place and so on. Now, if you go by the playbook, typically you will have, policies or benefits and so on and so forth. So some of the benefits are insurance benefits, all right, which include, say, your family and your extended family, which is your parents or parents-in-laws, right? So sometimes, at the back of the mind, you feel, hey, it's a great benefit. I don't have to worry if something happens to them. Hospitalization end to end is kind of taken care of it, right? So that's number one. Number two is, a lot of times there are flexible benefit plans which helps you to save taxes and all that, right? And I'm going to kind of, say that as much as it is important because people take home a little more if they kind of, go through that plan.
Yeah.
In my recent experience, I've seen that, we thought at Talent 500, we had given the best of the well-being benefits primarily. All right. And we used to do survey twice a year, every 6 months. And we were rated third in our employee benefits, wherein in our observation, we were probably a little far, or I would say a little further from the market in terms of our benefits offerings, right? So when I say look at well-being, of course, there are different parts of well-being, but I'm focusing right now on the benefits. But look at it this way, that, there was a complete dissonance that we had the best in class, probably the policies, a futuristic, insurance benefit, flexible benefit plan. And then we get rated third. And when we kind of, use that same data to go back and find out that what exactly is the reason why people feel that way, it came down to our leaves policy. As simple as that. And, people were feeling back then, that it's difficult because the work is heavy and nothing to do with the managers or the culture, but the work is heavy and it does not allow us to kind of take timely leaves. All right. It also kind of, brought in the point of feeling burnt out. There were, certain teams being a startup, required to work certain Saturdays. And then, of course, we had a compensation off that was given, but we used to kind of say, take it anytime in, up to 6 months. You don't have to rush to kind of do it. But there were a lot of people sitting on comp offs, who were like, I want to avail it, but work does not allow me to do so. Right. And which is where probably, we tweaked our leave policy also to say that certain people with certain accumulated leaves will have to take mandatory leaves. A simple tweak kind of, made a huge difference in the way the leave policy was also being executed. Right. Now, it looks that, we're talking about employee benefits, but then when the employee takes a mandatory 10 days of leave, comes back, right, to the organization, you can only imagine the performance he or she is likely to deliver, right? Because that person feels that I'm being well taken care of, right? We have also kind of, in a particular year, executed something like a shutdown, where, it was the first year of our starting up and at Talent 500. And we realized that by October or November, there was so much of burnout within the organization that we decided that between 25th of December till 1st of January, it's going to be a mandatory shutdown. All right. This was also the time most of the organization was recovering from the post-COVID effects and everything. So we decided, nobody works. All right. Everyone goes kind of, takes their much needed, say, December break and comes back. We have also kind of, executed a certain ways to reduce the burn wherein there are no Fridays, no meetings Fridays and so on and so forth, where probably, certain teams have kind of gone and said that, okay, whatever is the bare minimum meeting only then, but no other meeting on Fridays primarily. And we have seen that this has a direct impact on the individual's productivity and indirectly on performance as well. So I think the way I look at well-being is not just from a benefits point of view, but also kind of using on a regular basis the surveys to kind of, see what best can be tweaked.
Exactly. These are very, I think, truly like an employee first company, because for you guys to also take these surveys and then actually make changes based on them, because obviously data collection is only valuable when it truly leads to action, which sort of brings me to another question I have in mind. So how do you turn this sort of feedback gathered from performance evaluations and employee surveys into actionable strategies that lead to real change? So this is an example that you did mention, right? Like when you were rated third in that category, you basically went back and you tweaked a few changes. But can you share an instance where insights from surveys completely changed the way you approached performance management in particular? Because that's something that we're talking about right now.
Absolutely. Getting surveys, should be the part of this whole process when you run performance reviews, right? So when we ran the first performance reviews, we did something like an end of, performance review survey. And in that, we did ask a lot of these questions, like, how was the form? I'm like, how were the forms, that you filled in? Were they succinct? Were they crisp? Were they kind of, do we need to do anything more of, less of, and so on and so forth, right? And I won't kind of go into the depths of this whole exhaustive form that we kind of created. But I think the responses brought to our attention a couple of things. Number one was, very specific to the rating. Now, our ratings, I would say, was a 3-pointer rating first time. All right. Okay. And in that 3-pointer, probably, we got a feedback that, hey, there could be one more rating that could be added. All right. And typically, I would say that the first rating that kind of, was, of course, does not meet expectations, which is the bottom.
Yeah.
Then there was meets expectations. And then the third rating was exceeds expectations, right? And then when we ran the feedback, there were a lot of people, who came back and said, but when you say the first one, which is does not meet the expectations, and the second one, there could be certain people who probably have 80% or 90% of achievement, but still does not meet the expectations. How do we kind of, categorize them? So literally in the second year, we kind of added one more rating number or scale, wherein we just said kind of divided the meets expectations into two parts, which said, meets some expectations and meets all expectations. And that made a big difference in the way people were able to kind of, give a good rating scale. All right. The second thing that kind of, came by was, we used to kind of send out dossiers at the end of it, which was more like a consolidation about what did the manager say, what did you write, what did your peers say, and it became more like a PDF, right? And we didn't take the behavioral and I would say, the behavioral way to look at that dossier into account. So we got a feedback that the number is pretty glaring on our face, right? So you get a 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. So typically, if you get a 2 or a 3 or a 4, 4 is still people are happy. But if somebody gets a 2 or a 3, the number is on our face, and I don't like it when I see that number. So we said, okay, why don't we kind of move away from the number and provide the text. So as simple as these minor changes, all right, or for that matter, the individual development plan. Now we had a system back then where the individual development plans was kind of two separate things. We brought it out together, where whatever was committed, by the employee and by the manager were on that document as well. All right. So I think I'm just saying that no people initiative should go without a kind of a feedback survey, which helps you to primarily understand, what you're doing well and what you're not. Of course, I did only speak about what probably we brought in as changes. We were also appreciated, for a couple of things that we did good. So we retained those things and then we kind of tweaked the others. All right. And I think that's the way to also ensure the way we kind of keep the performance reviews continuous. I think the way performance management system needs to be also reviewed on continuous basis, I think is the best way to kind of get the data through the reviews.
Yeah, definitely. I think employee surveys in general play a very, very, very important role in any company's growth whatsoever, because it's only the employees who can actually understand the pulse of the company and actually tell you what needs to be changed, what needs to be kept, right? But yeah, I think I'm really interested to talk more about the measurement and data sort of, topic, because data analytics have become very increasingly important to performance management as well as, in general. So, digressing from the topic or the theme a little bit, if you could tell me how you have used data driven insights to enhance decision making in any capacity.
Data has a great story in itself, right? So I'm kind of probably going to go back to say that when it comes to performance, when you look at the overall, say, organization, it tells you a different story. When you look at say at a functional level, it gives you a different story. When you go to a managerial level, it will tell you another story. And, typically when you understand these different stories, you can even understand, who's a lenient manager, somebody who's probably, giving all the high scores to an individual. Or on the other side, when, somebody is a very strict manager, their standards are like gold standards and, probably nobody would qualify as such, right? And how does this impact? This impacts probably the employee from a promotion point of view on getting probably a better rating in that sense. And I think that is how data is a great storyteller, right? So you can even kind of drill it down to the nth level to understand that maybe a star of yesterday today is not a star, and what happened, what changed, all right? And if you kind of go through what the person has filled in those forms, you can even kind of dive a little deeper that whether this person was given unachievable targets, which led to probably the person not performing well, then in that case, this probably wasn't the best way to kind of review the person, right? I'll just for the sake of example, you're probably venturing into a new territory, to position your product, all right? It's a new territory. And, even the first sale should be celebrated, right? And that person is never going to kind of, achieve what probably at regular, somebody else is going to achieve, right? So I think, if that person is compared to somebody in the regular territory, the numbers are going to look poor and the person is going to get a very poor ranking or a rating, right? Now, when you understand this story, you can take it back to the functional head and have a discussion to say, hey, this is unfair to the employee. And how do I know it? Because, the person has a backstory or that he's kind of, he's been put up in a new territory. All right. Now, these things are only and only possible when you kind of review the data. So I think data plays a very big role at this point in time in the way you look at performance as such, right? So calibration typically, all right, the stories that come to my mind as a part of the ratings, I think these are great places to look for those stories as well.
Yeah, definitely. Data does play a very important part, and I feel like with technology taking, so much precedence in general, we can use data in a lot of ways to, in general, enhance the culture of any company whatsoever. So yeah, as we sort of look forward to what's next in the field and for our, final questions. What do you think HR leaders have to address in the future, specifically when startups are experiencing such rapid growth?
Once again, we'll go back to what we discussed some time ago, is that the overall objective of performance reviews is to understand the alignment, right? And I think the whole thing, most of the human resources professionals get it right. Most of the organizations today get it right, in terms of feedback reviews, in terms of identifying the individual journeys and so on and so forth. I think when I look at performance management and what the future has, especially with the, I think, usage of AI today, is how individual journeys can be hyper personalized. All right. And I say this a lot because I think, some people want to go the people managerial route. Some people want to become, I would say, thought leaders and remain individual contributors. And now both of these folks will have a very different journey. It cannot be kind of generalized at this point in time in the way they develop, the way they have their growth, and so on and so forth. So I think I'm only going to say that I think the future lies in how do we capitalize AI and the entire performance reviews to craft, I would say, the individual's growth journey in an organization. I think that's what I feel is what we can look forward to. So I'm going to leave you once again with a visual because that's my visual thinking. But think about it that you finished with your performance reviews. You had a individual development plan. That plan is crafted basis your learning style. That tells you how much time should you spend on the job, how much time should you spend, learning courses, how much of time should you kind of, get mentored. It's very personalized. And think about it this way, that after all of this, you just have to follow the plan and kind of, build your, success story. So I think that's what we can look forward to.
Definitely. I mean, if something like this is implemented in the near future, then I'm pretty sure attrition will be completely zero, because personalization is what every employee looks for, because they want to grow in their career trajectory in the way that they would like to do it. So I think companies, if they actually start doing this, that would be amazing to an extent. Perfect, Saurabh, this honestly has been fantastic. I think I really appreciate you sharing your journey with us today. In general, I think your hands-on experience scaling teams and handling all these tricky performance situations, and specifically all the different kind of situations you've handled with respect to the kind of startups you've worked with, is exactly what our listeners need to hear. And I am very, I'd say, struck by how you've managed to keep the human element while dealing with all these growth challenges, and also really appreciate the different terms that you have coined for every small initiative that you have taken. I think that is very personalized, and I think that's a very, very great initiative in general. Before we wrap up, of course, I want you to thank you for being so candid about both the successes as well as all the issues and the headaches that you face, because I feel like that's what makes these conversations worthwhile and real. And I'm sure that our listeners will take away some very actionable ideas that they can implement, and they also have names to those ideas actually. So I think that's it's going to be a very trainful episode over. Thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Thank you once again for having me and allowing me to share my experience.
Thank you.